En esta masterclass platicaremos sobre la serendipia con el Dr. Busch.
So I started reading Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which is highly recommended, by the way. It's all about essentially how can you find meaning even in the toughest of situations. He was in the toughest situation you can imagine, a concentration camp, and he tried to figure out how can you still, in the toughest of situations, find some kind of meaning. And so I started reading this and I got very inspired, and I realized that what I enjoy the most doing is connecting people, connecting ideas, and really kind of initiating meaningful impact. And I started out as a community builder. So we started a community called Sandbox Network around 13 years ago, 12 years ago, which is also active in Mexico City, by the way, which is all about identifying young people who are pushing boundaries in different fields, you know, innovators in business, in politics, in design, in arts, and other areas, and then helps them make the ideas happen. And one of the things that happened during that time was you would go to a dinner somewhere in the world, a Sandbox dinner, and people would be like, oh my God, such a coincidence, such a coincidence, such a coincidence. So it seemed to be an environment where people seem to have a bit more coincidences than in other environments. And we started calling it a serendipity accelerator and so on and so on. But at that point, it was more like a practical interest of mine. And then, you know, when I continued as entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, serendipity popped up everywhere for some reason. And then later on, you know, I went more into academia and I started research. And what fascinated me was that, you know, the most purpose-driven, successful, joyful people that I studied and that I worked with, they seem to have something in common. They all somehow cultivate serendipity. They see something in the unexpected, they see something in uncertainty and turn it into positive outcomes. And so that's why I got really excited about this question of how can we build a science-based framework for cultivating serendipity, for cultivating these positive unexpected outcomes, and what can we learn from that and really kind of develop our own muscle for having more serendipity. And so that is really the book that we'll talk a bit about tonight, which is really about that question of how do you essentially learn from all these different people around the world. A lot of my research has been in sub-Saharan Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, and then in New York and in London. And there's a lot of kind of different stories, but they all have something in common. And that's what I want to talk about. What is the pattern behind that lets us learn from those people and really kind of distill the process behind it. And what I also found really fascinating is, you know, when reading deeper into the research in chemistry, you know, when you accelerate molecules and accelerate those kind of molecules where you don't know what the reaction will be, and you accelerate it, serendipity happens more often. In physics and quantum physics, you know, we learn a lot about how energy spreads. In management sciences, we learn a lot about how we can navigate uncertainty by cultivating serendipity. So we have all these different sciences and social sciences, and they all increasingly say the same thing. And that's really what I want to focus on today. And so the book itself is essentially saying, this is a science-based framework. These are inspiring stories. These are exercises you can do. And that is how you have more serendipity in your life. Just to be sure that we are all on the same page, what we're talking about, a couple of examples. You know, one example is if you have slightly erratic hand movements like I do, you tend to spill coffee all the time. And so, you know, back in the days when coffee shops were still open before COVID, I used to spill a lot of coffee. And imagine that situation, you're in a coffee shop, you spill coffee over someone, and you sense that there might be some kind of connection with that person. You sense there might be something there. And now you have two options, right? Option number one is you just say, I'm so sorry, here's a napkin, and then you walk outside and you think, what could have happened had I talked with that person, right? And the other option is, of course, that you say, oh, I'm so sorry, I was so in my mind, I was thinking about X, Y, Z. You start a conversation, and perhaps that person turns into your love partner or into your co-founder or into your business partner or something else. And so the point is, a lot of times that unexpected moment of spilling a coffee or so leads to unexpected things. Of course, that happens a lot at the moment. You know, the unexpected big moment being COVID that happens, and what happened with the breweries, for example. You know, they used to sell their alcohol to restaurants and everything, and now, you know, restaurants went bankrupt, so they realized, oh my God, hey, we can actually use the alcohol to produce hand sanitizer. And so a lot of breweries actually turned into hand sanitizer companies. Here's another example. That's a TEDx volcano. I don't know if anyone remembers that volcano that broke out a couple of years ago in Europe with the unpronounceable name, E and then 14 letters, Efyakirko. And so that volcano broke out. An Icelandic friend of mine said, Christian, you're stupid trying to pronounce that name. Just say E and then 14 letters, whatever these 14 letters are. And so that volcano broke out. And you might remember there was this huge ash cloud over Europe. And so planes were grounded, nothing got out of the country. And at that point, there was the Skoll World Forum, so the biggest forum for social entrepreneurs in the world. And I got a call on a Saturday morning. You know, I had a long night out, and I was kind of somehow, you know, I picked up the phone early some Saturday morning, and it was an unknown number. And I was curious, and I picked up, and there was this guy on the line who said, "Hey, Christian, we don't know each other yet, but a friend gave me your number. My name is Nathaniel. I'm from San Francisco, and I'm stuck in London. And with me are all these amazing participants of the Skoll World Forum. We were all stuck in London. So we all have our schedules cleared. So I was thinking, I want to bring them all together and organize a conference." So within 32 hours, he organized TEDx Volcano, one of the coolest TEDx events ever. You know, with speakers like Jeff Skoll, the first eBay president, with kind of 10,000 people on the recorded live stream, like an amazing event. And the point here is that, you know, everyone else had a volcano happen. Everyone else had that unexpected event happen that, you know, they were stuck in London. But Nathaniel used that as a trigger to essentially go to TED and say, hey, I want to turn this into an opportunity. I want to tell an amazing story around it. They loved it, gave him the brand. Then local co-working spaces gave him space. Local people said, we want to help out. And so it kind of triggered the whole thing where he was the only one who actually did something with it. Can anyone guess what this thing on the right is? Any ideas? You can use the chat function if you want, or you can also, I think you can speak as well. I don't think we have the, any ideas what that could be? I'm just checking the chat. If anyone has any ideas, please put it in the chat. So it's actually a good sign that you don't, because so a couple of years ago, a couple of decades ago, actually, researchers were giving people medication against angina. They wanted to test if it works. And they realized that in male participants' trousers, there was some kind of movement happening, you know? And so what would we usually say would be like, oh my God, that's embarrassing that there's some movement happening in the participants' trousers. So we would probably either try to ignore it, right, that the man had an erection, or we would essentially say, oh my God, let's try to find a better way to, you know, not have that side effect happen. They said, you know what, that is unexpected, but a lot of men in the world have that problem to not have movement in that department. So why don't we essentially develop a medication into that direction? And that is how Viagra evolved, right? It was coincidental. It was people kind of seeing an accident happen and then connecting the dots to a bigger problem and saying, oh my God, we can actually solve that. And then last but not least, can anyone guess what this thing here is on the bottom? Chicken skewer, anything? Chicken wings? Yeah, Azel, you're relatively close actually. Anyone else? So we have chicken wings so far. We have, what else? Chicken dryers. So essentially, so that is a potato washing machine. And so a company I've been working with called Haier, which is essentially the largest white goods company in the world. So they produce refrigerators, washing machines. They bought a General Electric appliances unit. So they're a huge company, and they essentially, produce washing machines. And they got calls from farmers, and farmers said, "Your crappy machine is always breaking down when I try to wash my potatoes." And so what would we usually say? We would probably say, well, it's a clothing washing machine. Like, don't put your potatoes in it. It's not made for that, right? They said the opposite. They said, you know what? That is unexpected, but there's a lot of farmers in China who might have the same problem. So why don't we build in a dirt filter and make it a potato washing machine? And so that's how the potato washing machine emerged. Again, coincidentally, but essentially people connecting the dots. So that's just a couple of examples to show you. And there's obviously like thousands and thousands of those kind of examples. Usually around 50% of innovations and inventions happen that way. Usually that's a lot of times how we find love. That's the kind of way we find business partners and so on. And the point here is that it's always the same process. And it's very different from the kind of blind luck. Blind luck is being born into a loving family, or inheriting something, or stuff that we can't influence, right? That's passive. That's something else. But the smart luck that serendipity is about is essentially about spotting and connecting dots. It's that kind of unexpected good luck that results from these unplanned moments, but it's our proactive decisions that lead to that. It's us acting to the moment and making accidents meaningful, or, as I talk about later, also creating more meaningful accidents. But so it's all about essentially saying, it's a process of always having some kind of trigger, right? So there's this unexpected moments. spilling the coffee, or a volcano breaking out and there's an ash cloud, or you know, movement in male participants' trousers, or COVID happening. Like these are the triggers, right? It's kind of something unexpected. But then we have to imbue meaning on it. We have to connect the dots. We have to do something with it and relate it to something else, right? So in the case of Viagra, relating it to a bigger problem. In the case of COVID, relating it to we need hand sanitizer and so on. So connecting the dots, we need to connect the dots, but also we need the tenacity and the grit to actually see it through and to do something with it. And so the beautiful thing is that once we see serendipity as a process of spotting something, seeing something in the unexpected, and then connecting the dots, then we can influence every step, right? We can create more triggers, and we can learn how to connect the dots, and we can also train our tenacity to do that. Now, one of the biggest problems, of course, is that we constantly miss serendipity, right? We might not see the trigger, we might not see something in the unexpected, we might not be able to connect the dots, and we might not have the tenacity to actually follow through with stuff and do something there. And agile functional fixes is a great point, and that's actually something, maybe briefly talking about it, because that's actually something, let me see if I can find this here. No, let's just talk about it. So essentially, so Azal just commented functional fixedness, and you know, it's interesting because so you know, when we look at serendipity, why don't we have it all the time, right? And so we'll talk in the rest of the session about a lot of factors. What are the biases and the barriers we have, but also then what can we do about them? And one big bias is exactly functional fixedness, right? The idea that it's the hammer and nail problem, right? When you have a hammer and you need the nail to get into the wall, you always, whenever you need a nail in the wall, you look for a hammer, right? Because that's what you learned. You learned that that is the way to do it. But you know, you could, like, if you don't know that a hammer exists, you might use any heavy object, right? Because essentially it's just about getting something into the wall. And so a lot of times when it comes to innovation, I've always found it interesting how the most radical innovations a lot of times don't come out of Silicon Valley or out of Germany or something, right? They come out of Kenya, they come out of Bangladesh, like microfinance, they come out of India, like healthcare. And so take the example of mobile banking, right? In the West, usually when you think about improving the system around money, you think about how can I improve the ATM, right? How can I improve a machine or stuff like that, incremental. Versus if you don't have an ATM in your village, you don't think about how to improve an ATM, right? You don't have an ATM. You think about, I want to get money from A to B. I have a mobile phone here, so how can I send money from my mobile phone to someone else's? And so that's how mobile banking came out of a context where you didn't have to unlearn the idea that there is an ATM system and so on. So unlearning functional fixedness is really a big one. Another one, and I think we can take something, we can do something risky here. Maybe practice what we preach. Excuse me already if that experiment doesn't work out, but I feel like, you know, why not? It's one of those evenings where we should just try it. What do you think is the probability? It seems we are 42 people in this room, right? What do you think is the probability that two of you have the same birthday? So that they, you know, that you have both birthday, like let's say February 22nd or January 21st. Like how would you get to that? Is it 5%? Is it 7%? Like what is the probability you think that two of you have the same birthday? 12%, all right. 20%, 5%. So the great thing is, so 3%, who bids more? So 20%, 10%. All right, wonderful. So we have a beautiful range. And so usually, of course, what we probably do a lot of times, right? We divide 42 and 365, right? So 365 days in the year, 42 people, and then we divide that with each other, and then we get something exactly usually between 10-20%, something like that. But now the interesting thing is that is how we think usually, right? Linear in that sense. But now I want to do an experiment with you. So let's do, oh yeah, David, thank you. So 18.45 might be the, the exact kind of calculation. I haven't calculated it, but that might be. But essentially that is exactly the calculation we would usually do, right? Now I want to do an experiment, and I need everyone please to do that. Can everyone please put the day and the month of their birthday, not the year, otherwise you could probably sue me, but just the month and the, so the day and the month. So, and if you see anyone who has your birthday, or if you see two people who have the same birthday, please let us know. So if you see two people who have the same birthday, please let us know. or if anyone has your birthday. And can anyone please, everyone put their birthday in? We need as many people as possible to put their birthday in so that it works. As soon as you see any overlaps, please let us all know. If any two people have a birthday. All right, perfect. So wonderful. We can, at this point already, so there are 2 March 10th. Wonderful. So we already have 1 birthday pair in this room, right? So 2 people already have the same birthday in this room, which is wonderful. So it was the same person, I think, both George. Okay, perfect. Thank you. No, George. So essentially, so we have at least 1 and perhaps 2 birthday pairs here. Okay, you too? Okay, excellent. So we have 2 birthday pairs. Fantastic. Great. And I'm sure, you know, if we could continue, there would probably be 3 or so birthday pairs. But I think we can stop at this point. So essentially, so in this room of 42 people, we already have 2 birthday pairs, right? And usually when you have groups of 40 to 60 people, you always have 3 to 6 people who have someone else who has their same birthday, right? Which is crazy, no? I mean, like, it's kind of, essentially, it feels very improbable to us, but actually it's extremely probable. So the probability of this was around 90% now that 2 people have the same birthday. And the reason for that is, and actually, when you have 23 people, next time you have 23 people together, I don't know if that is allowed in terms of COVID in Mexico, but if you have, next time you have 23 people or more in the room, 23 people already, the probability is 50% that 2 people have the same birthday. And so that's the birthday paradox. And the birthday paradox essentially says, look, we tend to think linear, right? We tend to think, let's divide 42 and 365, but actually it's exponential, right? So Victor has 41 people who might have the same birthday. Dave still has 40 people who might have the same birthday. Diana still has 39 people who might have the same birthday. And so it's an exponential function where it's actually extremely likely that 2 people have the same birthday. And so that is what happens all the time, that we think life is linear, right? We think we can plan it out. We think we can know everything. We can know every variable. But you know what? It's exponential. And it's actually so many potential variables. We had that in the morning, right? I was recording a podcast, and that was one of the most like famous podcasting studios, and still we had a technical glitch. And you would think, how can that even happen, that in such a professional environment it happens? Well, because there's so many potential small probable, right? It can be, I might like knock the laptop down the floor here. The internet connection might not work on my side. It might not work on their side. So it's all very small probabilities in themselves. But if you add all of them up, it actually becomes relatively likely that something might happen. So that's with life as well, right? We plan everything out, our career or something, but it is extremely likely that you run into someone at some point who tells you about an even more amazing job that you might not even have thought of, and then you end up there, right? And so that is actually something I'm very interested in, this whole idea of post-rationalization, right? That we assume life is step by step, so we plan everything out. And then life is more like a squibble, right? It's like check, 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 like here and here and here. But then we still tell it as if it was step by step. So imagine the situation, you're presenting your CV to a new employer. You might say something like, yeah, I wanted to go into this industry, and then I wanted to do this and this. Yeah, but you know what? Maybe you just ran into someone who told you something and you did something completely different. The point here is that A, we constantly underestimate how probable the improbable is. So we constantly underestimate how many triggers there are out there that could actually help us. And B, a lot of times we then airbrush serendipity out of stories because we want to always have this illusion of control, that we knew everything, we did everything and whatever, but that's actually not what it is. And that's what I find exciting about developing serendipity mindset, that we then don't see it as a weakness to have unexpected things happen that shape our life, but actually as a strength, because it's not about losing perfection. It's not about, like being weak for not having known everything. The opposite. We are alert enough to actually make the best out of the unexpected because it happens all the time. Now, I want to give you a couple of examples. So there's a couple of experiments just to show you a little bit how, for example, the idea of framing is important. So a colleague of mine did an experiment where he took someone who self-identifies as very lucky. So someone who says, I always have good things happen to me, life is good, X, Y, Z. And someone who self-identifies as very unlucky. So someone who says, bad things always happen to me, I'm always in accidents. And we all know those kinds of people in our lives, right? The people who seem a bit luckier than others and the people who seem a bit more unlucky than others. And now he says, go down the street, go into the coffee shop, order a coffee and sit down, and then we'll have our interview. What he doesn't tell them is that there's hidden cameras across the street and in the coffee shop, that there's a £5 note, so money in front of the coffee shop, and inside the coffee shop, there's the chair right next to the counter. There's this hugely successful businessman who can make big dreams happen. Now, the lucky person walks down the street, sees the £5 note, picks it up, goes inside, orders a coffee, sits next to the businessman, has a wonderful conversation, they exchange business cards, potentially an opportunity coming out of it, we don't know that part. Now, the unlucky person walks down the street, steps over the £5 note, so doesn't see it, goes inside, orders the coffee, sits next to the businessman, the other person's gone, ignores the businessman, and that's that. Now, at the end of the day, they ask both people, so how was your day today? And so the lucky person says, well, it was amazing. I found money in the streets. I made a new friend and, potential opportunity coming out of it. The unlucky person just says, well, nothing really happened. And that is fascinating. Across different contexts, you can see that people can have exactly the same situation and they make very different things out of it. And, in some situations like this one, sometimes extroversion and other traits play a little bit of a role. But a lot of times also introverts can have very similar lucky strikes. And we'll talk about this in a bit as well. But for now, the importance being the way we look at life almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy already, because we see something in the unexpected versus we don't. Now, how can we know things are serendipitous? Well, one thing we do in our research, for example, is try to understand counterfactuals. So we try to understand what could have happened. I mentioned the example of the coffee shop, right? You can always think about when you have serendipity happening, what could have happened had I not acted, right? Had I not started the conversation, had I not read something and connected it to some other problem and so on and so on. But also we can see it between different people. So for example, a couple of decades ago, two researchers at the same time injected rabbits with papain, the enzyme, and the ears of the rabbits flopped. So they made a funny kind of movement. And that was unexpected to both of them. But only one of them actually followed through and connected the dots and said, you know what, that probably has to do with bloodstream. So if we can use that same thing for curing arthritis, then actually that could become extremely interesting. And so that is how, like that research stream later on ended in like Nobel Prizes and everything else, versus the other guy didn't really follow up on it. The point here is that we can see the way how two people acted on the same situation can have very different implications depending on how they acted and how they did something out of it. One thing I wanted to also briefly mention is, I think one of the beautiful things that happened when writing the book was, that I also learned a lot about, for example, things such as if serendipity is all about positive outcomes, the question of what is a positive outcome and at which point do we look at it, right? And so, I remember, for example, I went to my publisher with the first draft of the manuscript. And I was like, hey, here's the manuscript. And they were like, look, we love it, but we need more love stories. And I was like, well, look, I'm not sure if I, as the kind of 35-year-old single guy, if I'm the right person to tell you about love. Like, what do I know about love? And they were like, no, but we need some love stories. And I was like, all right, I'll see. And right after that meeting, I had another meeting scheduled with my ex-girlfriend, who is a very close friend of mine now. And so I went into the coffee shop and I was like, well, hey, do you have any good love stories for me? I need good love stories. And she was like, well, our story. And I was like, what do you mean our story? We're not together anymore. Where's the success here? What's the positive outcome here? And she was like, look, like we met serendipitously in Starbucks, we kind of watched each other's laptops. We kind of had a nice conversation. It developed into a relationship. And essentially we put each other on different tracks, meeting the right people, giving each other a lot of emotional support. And it was a very formative period for both of us. So essentially her point was, even if we're not together anymore, for both of us, actually, it was a period that led us to where we are today and what shaped us into today. And, to me, it kind of redefined a little bit, what does it mean to have positive outcomes? Is the positive outcome of a relationship just that you're still together? Or is it that you had a really positive impact on each other? But also the question of how, I'm in a very healthy, wonderful relationship now where I wouldn't be where I am today without that kind of situation back then. And so the point is, back then it felt like bad luck, but actually now it turned into a wonderful good luck. And so the point is, serendipity a lot of times depends on when we look at it, right? And when in the history we look at it, a lot of serendipity comes out of crises, out of accidents, out of bad things. And so that is also coming back to the grid question, and we'll talk about this later. But so one thing before I dive into the kind of mechanisms of how we can actually have more serendipity in our lives, I want to acknowledge that there's a lot of structural constraints, right? There's societal inequality, racial inequality, and other things that actually make the base level of serendipity very different for people, right? I'm here in the West Village. I have access to people, access to ideas. I have a much higher serendipity base level. So even if I don't do a lot of dot connecting, I will have more than someone who starts out from another point of departure in a resource constrained environment or so. So at the same time as we work on the mindset, of course, we have to work on kind of societal reforms and other things that really enable people to have similar opportunity spaces. And if you want to discuss later about these questions, I'm very passionate about that side as well, around especially policy and other questions. So now, long story short, like one of the things really that is really at the core of this is to say that the way we deal with the unexpected defines who we are. And when we look back on life, a lot of times the unexpected shape the really important things. So the question is, how do we build that muscle for serendipity? And so I briefly, in the last part of this session, want to share a couple of practices with you that I found very helpful and useful in doing that. One is really around asking questions differently. So, you know, we all kind of sometimes fall into this autopilot of asking, what do you do? Like, you know, things that put people into boxes. But, you know, we can shift that by asking things such as what's on your mind, what inspired you about a presentation, and really kind of opening that opportunity space of potentially more dots. But more importantly, when someone asks us that question, right, we can do what Ollie Barrett does, a wonderful entrepreneur in London. When you would ask him, what do you do? He would tell you something like, I'm a technology entrepreneur, but recently started reading into the philosophy of science. But what I'm really excited about is playing the piano. So what he's doing here is he's giving you 3 potential hooks where you could be like, oh my God, such a coincidence. I just started piano sessions, matinees, you should come over. Or, oh my God, such a coincidence, my brother is a professor of the philosophy of science, you should talk with him. Whatever it is, we can use every situation, every conversation to see the couple of dots, to see the bit of information about things we're interested in, so that other people can connect the dots for us, and so that other people can actually be part of creating serendipity without us even knowing that they could be interested in it. We give them the opportunity, rather than pushing something on them and pitching something on them, we give them the opportunity to essentially take it out of whatever we're saying. Now, a second point is around looking at mistakes or crises differently. There, one of my favorites is actually the project funeral, or the kind of post-mortem exercise, where, you know, the problem a lot of times in organizations and companies, in families, in every social setting is that whenever something doesn't work out, we try to hide it, right? Because we don't want to be a loser, we don't want to be a failure, we don't like things that don't work, right? It makes us look bad, or we feel it makes us look bad. So the problem is we don't really learn from each other, because we always like hide the failures and only talk about the successes. And so the project funeral tries to incentivize the opposite. So the idea here is that the project manager of a project or an idea that didn't work speaks in front of people from other divisions and essentially lays it to rest and says, this is what we learned. So it's not about celebrating failure, it's about celebrating the learning from what didn't work, the learning from experimentation. And so in one example, they developed this, a company I worked with, they developed this wonderful window glass, and it was a technology that wouldn't reflect the light. So it's an amazing technology, but they underestimated that not a lot of people would pay so much money for it to just buy it. So they laid it to rest and they said, you know what? Next time we'll look at the market a bit closer. Now someone in the audience goes, hey, have you considered what this would mean for solar? If we would take that technology, how much energy that could absorb in a solar device. And so that is how, quote unquote, coincidentally, part of their solar division emerged. You know, people would say, oh, it was so lucky that this person was there at the right time in the right place and so on. Yeah, but you know what? You created a process that made it more likely that something like this would happen, and that actually cultivated serendipity in the process. Now, another one is around reframing situations. One of my favorite situations, one of my favorite organizations is a social enterprise in the Cape Flats in South Africa, in Cape Town. And essentially it's former drug addicts, people who had a very rough time. And they developed a low-cost education methodology where, you know, it's things such as 10 steps to use social media to build your business, or things like that. Very easy kind of to follow like methodology. And they go into other communities and essentially work with local hospices or local schools to get people to become teachers. And so, you know, when they go into a new community, instead of asking, what do you need? Or instead of asking about resources, They say, what is already here? How can we make the best out of what is at hand? There's an old garage, fantastic. That's a potential training center. There's a former drug dealer, fantastic. That person will have amazing social capital. That person will be very creative and resourceful. And if we can turn them into a teacher, we can turn a community around. The point here is that they make the best out of what is at hand. And by doing this, people feel dignified that they can actually create their own luck locally. And so that methodology also, that approach, you can use that in every context. Like imagine you want to organize an event and you need 50 chairs, right? And you usually would put a budget item to your organization and would say, I need 50 chairs. In their methodology, what they say is, well, first of all, do you really need the chairs, or can people sit on the floor? Can they sit on a bench or something? If you really need the chairs, can you borrow them from the restaurant next door that is closed at the same time, or someone else who's around here? And only if you can't do all these things, then you can get the money in. The point here is that by trying to make the best out of what is at hand, you recombine assets and resources and capabilities very differently, because you're now looking at a situation completely differently. And so when people can do this in the most resource constrained of environments, of course, we can do that in our environments even more so. Now, there's a lot of other practices. I think we can go deeper into that in our discussion. I want to make sure that we really have the conversation as well. I want to mention two more to finish this off. One is around really kind of leveraging technology. COVID, of course, had this effect that a lot of times the water cooler moments are not happening that much anymore, right? So the situation where you bump into a colleague and you randomly talk about something and a great idea comes out of it or something, which is especially important, of course, for younger people, right? This ability to run into more senior people who might know about an opportunity randomly, and then like a new career comes out of it or whatever. And so what some organizations like Google and others have been doing is random coffee trials. So the idea here is that people within an organization indicate when they are free. So like, let's say Wednesday at 2 p.m. and whatever, and then they get randomly paired with people within the organization, who usually people who they don't know yet, maybe with an inspiring question, like what's your challenge at the moment, whatever it is. But essentially they randomly have that water cooler moment with some person they get randomly paired with. And so what it does is it cultivates serendipity, but also it gives their sense of belonging, that every week still my life could change in a better way, or every week there's something that can still happen, especially in COVID times that can sometimes be a bit depressing. And then last but not least, so one thing that came out of, we just finished an interview series with over 30 of the top CEOs, MasterCard, Procter & Gamble and others. And we essentially try to understand what is it that makes them successful and that really kind of makes their organization successful. And so we sat down with them, and one of the things that all of them have in common is that they're very good at having a certain North Star, a certain sense of direction, so that people feel they know where they're going. But at the same time, they don't over-define the plan. They don't over-define the strategy. They are open to the unexpected. And by doing this, people know always when they see something unexpected, they can connect it to that kind of bigger purpose, that bigger idea, so they can have that serendipity, but they are not forced into particular kind of functionally fixed things. And so, take an example also of, here in New York, where I am at the moment, the governor here made something very different than most other governors when COVID happened. When it happened early on this year, a lot of the governors here, a lot of the kind of people running the states, they essentially try to put out exact timelines. So they said, we will open up, because they had to shut down some of the states, and they said, we will open up exactly on May 15th, and this is my exact timeline. Cuomo was much smarter. He said, you know what? I have two North Star, two principles here, economic health and public health. And when they are fulfilled, I will open up again. Here's an approximate timeline. These are the approximate steps. But I will tell you already now that I will change this timeline based on new information. And so the point is that a lot of the governors had an incentive to hide information, to hide data that didn't fit into their plan, right? Because they were like, oh my God, I don't want to revise my timeline. It might look weak and so on and so on. So they either were hiding data, or they had to adjust and really looked weak towards their people. Now, Cuomo essentially, because he already said, I give you a sense of where we're going, but I can't give you the exact timeline, it was very easy for him to essentially kind of reschedule the timeline and do that different. And that is the case with all good leadership, right? That if we can give a sense of direction, people trust us, that they know where we're going, but at the same time allow for the unexpected, that is what real leadership does in the end. Now, long story short, being the German I am, I want to close on a philosophical note. One of the core reasons why I embarked on this journey and why I kind of got so excited about serendipity is that serendipity is all about potentiality. It's all about what could be. And so I've been a big fan of Goethe. Viktor Frankl actually was very inspired by Goethe because Goethe, he had this idea that if you take someone as they are, you make them worse. But if you take someone as who they could be, you make them capable of becoming who they can be. And so it's really this idea that, you know, if I see a potential teacher in a drug dealer, if I see a potential training center in a garage, what I do is I can see potentiality. I see what could be. And then I can connect the dots towards that, right? I can do something with it and really go towards that. And so serendipity is really all about that idea that every moment, every situation, there could be something that improves our life. And I've seen it in my own life that a lot of, especially during tough times like at the moment, it has given me so much joy and enthusiasm and turned uncertainty from a threat into an ally. But also, you know, I mean, if you're a person like me who grew up in Germany, you know, we love plans, we love planning, and it gives us anxiety to have ambiguity. It gives us anxiety to not be able to predict. But you're really reframing that situation and saying, wow, like actually there's a lot that can still be happen and that is positive. And that's obviously how a lot of innovation, inventions and everything else happens then as well. All my ventures, by the way, happened that way. All my romantic relationships happened that way. So it's just a beautiful thing. I think that I hope, you know, that everyone can benefit in some way from this. With this, thank you so very much. And I'm looking forward to our conversation. And also, I would love to, I mean, obviously, if you have any questions, but also if you have any ideas, you know, what do you do in your own lives to have more serendipity? Or do you have any kind of practices that help you to have more of this? Do you meditate or, you know, other things that we can all learn from? Please do let us know.
Well, Christian, thanks a lot. Really, really interesting. And I have the first question. Can you go back one slide where you have the circles?
Yeah.
Those circles.
Yeah.
Can we learn more about these circles in your book?
Yes, absolutely. So the book covers a lot of those circles, and also then how do we essentially, what are exercises that we can all do to really kind of like get ourselves into having more of that happen. Yeah.
So I want to open the microphone for questions before I tell a little story, but so now if you want to open your microphone if you have a question you would like to ask, a story you would like to tell related to serendipity.
I have one question.
Victor. Yeah.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you very much for fantastic presentation of serendipity. I just have this doubt about serendipity and creativity, because at the moment that you are saying you need to connect the dots, for me, a really good definition of creativity is exactly that thing. It's just connecting the dots. So I don't understand very well, when is the serendipity start and finished, and then start creativity?
Yeah, that's a great question. It reminds me of Steve Jobs. No, he used to say that creators always feel guilty because, you know, they essentially what they do is they connect dots. They see something in the moment and connect the dot, right? And then other people think, oh, they worked for 10 years, but they just saw something that others didn't see, right? And so that's kind of interesting. And that's actually, you know, I look at it in terms of Venn diagrams that, like, you know, to me, creativity is one Venn diagram that is a lot about the question of how do I essentially see something in something that others don't see? How can I be resourceful and so on? And then kind of like serendipity mindset is like almost like the broader, you know, that brings together creativity with persistence and tenacity, with these kind of other things that essentially get into the process of the serendipity. And so it's very related, but it's almost, yeah, I see it in Venn diagrams that a lot of the practices, for example, that are useful for creativity, like lateral thinking, the ability also to, for example, you know, I know a lot of engineers are in the room. You know, if you look at, you know, for example, if you look at ants and you look at these small animals, right, and you see them walk around, you can inform traffic systems, right? You can think about how can traffic systems work, and so that kind of thinking that in creativity is very useful is also very useful, of course, then for serendipity itself. So, Victor, I think my answer, and I think that's one of these questions you could answer in 20 different ways probably, but my answer would be I see it as Venn diagrams, and they have a big overlap actually in that case. So, thank you.
All right. Okay. Do we have any other question? open your microphone. Now is the time. What I see here is that, and this is something we have been discussing here at the Innovaction about detecting the opportunity and then taking action on that opportunity, and how to get yourself exposed to opportunities. And sometimes we discuss it in class, like, well, you need to be open-minded, you need to be aware of the situation, and try to give skills for situation awareness. So you detect the opportunity and then take action on what's happening. And I just want to, I relate this to a story that happened to us recently. We have a group here in Monterrey. It's a community more than a group. It's called COVID Task Force, and I think some of the people here is in that group. And it started when the pandemic started. Some of the people we know about that work in technology, that work in academia, entrepreneurs, we are starting to ask ourselves, what can we do? How can we create something? And then with that conversation, we started just a small group, and then that community started to grow. And right now there's like 150 people in there. But it has helped a lot in developing technology for COVID, because all the community starts to answer questions, starts to give technical advice, starts to interact with each other. But my point is that it happened by serendipity, and it happened by taking actions. So somebody said, it started with an email and asking for a meeting. And then after that meeting, okay, let's open a WhatsApp group. And then after the WhatsApp group, okay, let's just invite people, let's start conversations. And one of the activities that we had was to host regular meetings to showcase ideas and to showcase projects or technologies. And then we could see how the conversations and the development just continue after that. And it became very enriching, and then the community involved into helping to solve problems. And I related to what you're saying, to serendipity, to taking action, to seeing the opportunity. And yeah, to be open-minded.
Yeah, that's a great example, because that's exactly it's exactly so often about this kind of combination of open-mindedness, but also being proactive and doing something about it. Because a lot of times, I mean, it's interesting, because to me it's also very related to like questions around like emotional questions, right? In terms of that, a lot of us might have an imposter in us, right? An imposter syndrome, where we might not feel worthy or ready, or So for example, I had a friend of mine, well, now a friend, but someone, I asked him, so how much serendipity do you have in your life? And he said, never before I was 25, and after 25 all the time. And I was like, what changed? And he was like, well, before I was 25, so he used to work as a waiter, and people, like, he has great energy, he's like a wonderful person, so people would always offer him things. They would say, hey, I should put you in touch with this company, they would like someone like you, and so and so. And he would always say no, because he didn't feel worthy. He didn't feel that someone like you, like, he grew up with a family that would always say, people like us are not supposed to do more than work in service or something like that, right? And so he had this limiting belief in himself that he wasn't ready, or he wasn't worthy to actually act on the opportunity, even if he saw it, right? And so I think, like, a lot of times our proactivity can also be very limited by, we might see something, we might know what we could do with it, but actually we might not feel that we are deserving of it, or we are ready for it, and these things. And so one of the things that I found very useful for myself actually is that whenever I feel that feeling of, oh, like, I'm not ready for this, there's something that kind of keeps me back, like, to really try to understand where does it come from? Is it fear driven? Is it and really diving deeper into it and really reflecting on it. And if I feel that it's too fear driven, then, like, I'm literally forcing myself out of it. And so I think it's interesting, because that comes a lot to parenting also, right? How do we bring up our kids in ways that they feel worthy, and so on. So I feel like there's a lot of implications around that, but I think productivity is a big one. Arturo, hi.
Hello, I have a question. I would like to thank you for your presentation. I think it was pretty good. I actually been studying innovation, I don't know, probably 7 years, and never heard actually of the word serendipity. So that's actually something interesting. And what I see is that, as you say, it's a mindset, right? Serendipity. But are we talking about serendipity happens just in a person, or can it happen in a whole organization, for example? Is it a mindset that you can like create a culture out of it, or it's just like a personal mindset of each person that should have? Thank
you. Yeah. Thank you for the great question, Arturo. That's a great point. And by the way, like for you and for everyone, I'd love to keep in touch. It sounds like all of you have been working on wonderful things. So please feel free, in the spirit of serendipity, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, like let's connect and keep in touch. But Arturo, to exactly your point, I think it's interesting because it's both like individual level, right? In terms of the process I mentioned is very individual level in terms of how we have to see something and connect something. But a lot of times it's actually a team effort, right? So a lot of times it is essentially something where, you know, someone like Fleming, who kind of came up with penicillin, he sees something, but then he needs someone else to have the persistence to push it through with him. Or in a lot of founding teams, right? Like one person might have a great, wonderful idea, but then they need the grit of the other person to really pull it through. And so a lot of times serendipity comes out of teamwork. And it's interesting, right? Because we tend to celebrate the one person who seemed to have had the idea, the Steve Jobs type person, but the Steve Wozniak type person who actually was the one who like brought it through and pushed it. That's actually the really important one. And so it's great. And so to your point in terms of, I've actually been working a lot with companies on exactly that question around how do you build a culture where in a way people are incentivized to see the unexpected and to connect the dots. So for example, very simple things like in meetings, you know, asking one additional question like what surprised you last week, or what questioned our assumptions last week, just something, you know, where people get incentivized to look at data differently. Because, you know, imagine you're in a company, in a marketing company, and you just ran with a campaign. And let's say there were a couple of customers, like in the potato washing machine examples, that say, you know what, like, I'm not really happy about this. What we usually would do is we would discard it, right? Because we are so excited about the campaign. We worked on this for 2 years. Like, we don't want to see anyone who says that it's not the best campaign we could have, right? So we're disincentivized from actually seeing that. And then after half a year, we're like, it didn't work as well as we hoped it would work. And so then it's actually becoming very costly, and it's becoming like all these negative effects. Versus if we had spotted that at the beginning, we could have saved a lot of cost and so on, and potentially also identify new ideas much earlier. And so to your point, there's a lot of small things, small exercises we can do within companies that actually incentivize people to have more serendipity together, but also that then incentivizes them to collaborate more because it's such a team effort to do that. So absolutely, yeah.
Sure, I can agree in that part that probably, I mean, all the connections are made inside one head, but all of the different information and perspectives actually are being nurtured, like kind of by the different teams, right? So thank you for your answer.
Absolutely, Jordan. I think you hit the nail on the head. That the interesting thing is a lot of times that it can either be in the other person, right? Or even in like silent sources, right? A lot of times it might be in books, it might be in, and that's the fascinating thing, that it might be both the interaction between a human and a human, but also human to a book, or human to seeing something in the window, and all these different things, right? So it's fascinating. But teamwork is very broad in that, but you're completely right. Usually it's in between different ones. Alejandro, hi, hola.
Grüezi. Yes. So I would like to thank you as well for the great talk, just like Arturo did. But I do have a question, and it had to do with a quote that was in one of the slides from Viktor Frankl and Goethe. Mm-hmm. And it says, seeing things as they are will, I don't know if you can, that is it. If you take someone as they are, you make them worse. But if you take them as what they could be, you make them capable of becoming what they can be. Now, I assume that has to do with seeing the potential in people and exploiting that potential. But I do have a question with regards to how we see things. And as a Stoic, there is something that is constantly mentioned, and it's amor fati, which is something that Nietzsche said, and it's seeing things as they are, like seeing fate as it came, like the things that happened as they are, not trying to change them or have expectations of things happening in a different way, and embracing what happened and building upon that. And I sort of think, I don't know if it's something that is implied in the quote or not necessarily, but would seeing things through the lens of what they could be not blind us to seeing things outside of what we're expecting them to be? Like being in order to see the serendipity of the multiple things that can happen, should we not just stop expecting things to go a certain way and be completely open to whatever happens and embrace those alternatives, even if they disagree with what were our previous conceptions of what should happen in the first place?
That's such a fantastic question. And please, if there's any way to get an autograph from you now, I mean, you'll probably go places with those kind of questions. I can see the kind of next Nietzsche coming out of there right there. But that's a fascinating question. That's you know, it's a great question in the sense that I think that is really, in a way, it reminds me a little bit of the Ronald Reagan. He used to say he wanted to cut the hand of his economic advisor, because the economic advisor would always say on the one hand, on the other hand. So he just wanted to cut the hand, because then you don't have to say on the one hand or the other hand, you just have one hand. But so essentially what I'd say is that it's both in the sense that, you know, that quote, to your point, implies a lot that we have a certain like idea of potentiality ourselves, but you're right, that is limiting in the sense of we can only imagine so much, right? But then the beautiful thing is what we do with things such as hooks, right? Where we just put stuff out there, we then also allow others to bring in their own imagination of what could be. And then a lot of times actually they might see much more than we do, right? And they might see, to give you a simple example, I mean, a friend of mine, you know, she was working in a tech company, and she was very kind of like, she wanted to transition, and she just told a couple of friends about, hey, look, like, you know, I'm looking for new things, but just flagging it here. And someone came to her and said, oh my God, such coincidence, I just interviewed with an NGO that I didn't take the job, but they would love someone like you with your skill set. And she didn't even imagine that she could, like, that the quote unquote NGO industry would be anything that she could ever have imagined, because she thought her skills would only work in the tech industry. And so someone else had to see it for her, that potentiality. And so that, I think, is the beauty of, exactly to your point, not assuming that we can map it all out, but to essentially say we can map out a little bit, but then we have to be humble enough to also let others map things out for us, or to see new things in that. So I think it's exactly that point that you're making, Alessandro. So thank you so much. Wonderful, wonderful point. Thank you. And yeah, please do keep us posted about your developments. I'm sure there's really interesting things coming out of your beautiful mind in the future. That's
All right, very nice, Alejandro. Christian, we are on the time. We don't want to take much more time from you. I know you might be quite busy as well. But guys, everyone who were here in the session, we'll try to send you an email with Christian contact, so you can be in contact with him through Twitter or his email as well, so we can continue with this serendipity exercise and try to get more ideas and get the ball rolling. Arturo Martinez, where can we find your book? I just got it in Kindle.
Yeah, it should be everywhere on Amazon, and hopefully bookstores as well. Yeah, so I hope if you Amazon for sure. Yeah.
And just to finish, to close this, actually having you here in this masterclass was an act of serendipity. I saw your post in startup groups in London, and you sent you a message, and then you replied, and then we managed to get this masterclass going on. Thanks a lot for replying. Thanks a lot for giving us this opportunity, and hopefully something will come up in the future.
Yeah, well, and thank you so much, Azel, for connecting the dots. I mean, that was very much your proactivity. So thank you so much for making this happen. And yeah, wonderful to meet everyone. And yeah, hopefully see you all very soon. And let's keep in touch. Thank you. Have a good night.
All right. See you.